this a webinar on resilience of the society, a global perspective, because that is the first webinar of the core project. So we are very pleased to start our activity with this important topic. So my name is Marie-Christine Bonamour. I am the Secretary General of Public Safety Communication Europe. We are a forum based in Brussels, gathering the community of practitioners, industry and researchers, and with the aim of improving public safety communication and communication system. We are a partner in CORE. So I will start to present briefly what are the challenges of CORE. Then you will have a more detailed presentation about the project and then topical presentations. The rules for our meeting today are very simple. You will be all muted during the presentation. You will have the possibility to interact using the chat and to ask all your questions. The question will be managed at the end of the event, except for one presentation. That's a presentation about climate change as a disaster risk driver, presented by Birgit Bettner-Friedel, because Birgit might not be available during the full duration of the webinar. She's giving a lecture at the moment, so she will take your question just after our presentation. So let's do the formal opening. You will see that in the program, the presentation was supposed to be done by Paolo Capuano, who is a project coordinator for CORE. Unfortunately, Paolo is ill today, so I will replace him for his presentation. So we just share the presentation. Yes, so let's present the challenge of CORE. The core objective, it's really to have a transdisciplinary approach involving both environmental science and social science community for developing a safety culture to increase the resilience of our society. In the project, we have also very specific focus on vulnerable groups and also education in schools, because it starts there and we have to address young generation. So CORE will try to cover the whole disaster management cycle, prevention, preparedness, emergency management, response and recovery. CORE has the ambition to answer one of the key EU strategic orientation, that is to create a more resilient, inclusive and democratic European society. And that is part, for those who are familiar with the EU system, research activity are funded under different pillars, and within this pillar there are different clusters. And CORE belongs to the cluster 3, civil security for society. Because security research can really help to move from a reactive approach to security to a proactive approach based on foresight and anticipation. So the research and the innovation will support the implementation of a security union strategy, counterterrorism agenda, border management and security dimension of the new pact on migration and asylum. EU disaster risk also will help us to have our society better prepared. Disaster, whether natural or man-made, call for better preparation to prevent and reduce the loss of life, harm to health and the environment, economic and material damages, as well as to improve the understanding and reduction of disaster risk and post-disaster lesson learning. So that's why also in the core project, there will be a lot of work done about post-disaster lesson learning. Climate change is likely to exacerbate security challenge outside of disaster events, and lesson needs to be learned from the COVID-19 crisis, both in terms of preparedness, capacity building for crisis, and improving response to cross-sectoral aspects of such events. So the aim of all the projects that are funded under this cluster 3 have the objective to reduce losses from natural and man-made disaster through enhanced disaster risk reduction based on preventive action, better societal preparedness and resilience, as well as better response and recovery. So the activity will strengthen disaster risk management in a systemic way, including through cross-sectoral solution and multi-level governance. One objective is, of course, to enhance societal risk awareness and individual capacity to be better prepared, including psychologically to all the disasters that may affect us, and able to respond to disaster. So the core project has started last September and is gathering different organizations that are all committed to develop this multi-sectoral approach. And you will receive now a more specific presentation about core project and the different activity with the work of Raffaella Russo, project leader for CORE from UNICEF, who will present more in depth the CORE project. Raffaella, the floor is yours.
The devastating effects of recent natural and man-made phenomena highlighted the gaps in disaster preparedness in European society and the importance of increasing risk awareness and community resilience. Populations' readiness and the ability to apply optimal procedures during an emergency, including the most vulnerable groups, would undoubtedly make societies more resilient. CORE is a European project funded under the Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programme. The CORE Consortium is composed of 19 partners from 11 countries, including 6 practitioner entities and more than 80 researchers contributing to the Horizon 2020's focus on secure societies where citizens are facing increasingly threatening situations. CORE has 3 main goals: measure, control, and mitigate. That is providing the fundamental knowledge to enhance awareness, knowledge, and actions on the role of human factors and social, societal, and organizational aspects in risk awareness, risk perception, disaster risk management, and recovery of communities from disasters, including the role of these factors in cascading events. CORE is based on 3 pillars that are hard science, social science, and societal acceptance. The project methodology will rely on the following 6 building blocks: safety culture, social media support and threats, disaster scenarios and human behavior, community identity, cascading effects, governance. The study of 7 use cases over the 3 years of the project will lead CORE to produce a case study comparative analysis, a community resilience strategy report, a safety culture measurement toolkit, and to organize a workshop on procedures validation through stakeholders. Finally, CORE will involve schools and young people in the elaboration of an app to make the young generation a sort of prevention sentinels. Follow the development of CORE project on our website, www.project-core.eu, and on social media, Twitter and LinkedIn. The devastating
Yeah, sorry, I was too quick. So before Raffaella, we wanted to show you the video of the project. That is also a good introduction. So now the floor is to Raffaella.
Thank you, Marie-Christine. and good morning, everybody. I am Raffaella Russo, and I am the one in the project committee leadership of the core project at the University of Salerno. And with today's presentation, my main aim is to give you just a general overview of the core project and to let you be interested in our topics and to let you also follow us about our achievements and the results. This is just a table of contents, and I give you just very brief information about the core project. CORE stands for Science and Human Factor for Resilient Society. As Martin said, it started on September 2021 and will last till 31st of August 2024. We have 19 partners here, of which 6 practitioners. We have 11 different countries involved, and worked on the research topic of the core more than 80 researchers. On the right-hand side, you see the list of participants to the core project, and as I have said, the leadership is of University of Salerno. The overall objective of the core is to develop a harmonized vision of crisis management, awareness and capability through this transdisciplinary approach that merge together environmental and social communities. Since the editing phase of the core project, our aim was to have a consortium well balanced between social and environmental sides in order to define a common metrics with respect to both natural and man-made disaster scenarios to measure, control, and mitigate the impact on population. We will also pay particular attention to vulnerable categories, disabled, elderly, poor, as well as women and children. And let me say that for this particular aspect, we are very, very lucky because we have practitioners involved within our consortium that are specialized in rescue operation of particular vulnerable categories. CORE will also pay particular attention to the lesson learned from special countries, such as Japan, that have a very high level of risk awareness about seismic, volcanic, and tsunami risks, to understand how also to behave in such situation, also in other countries where the awareness is not so high. And we will also devote great attention to education in schools, using pupils as prevention sentinels. The methodology of the core project is based on 5 building blocks and 7 test cases. The building blocks are safety culture, social media, support and threats to safety culture and community resilience, disaster scenarios, human behavior and disaster community identity as a resilience factor, cascading effects, and governance. All these building blocks make the methodology of the core project. We also have 7 test cases: an earthquake case, terroristic attack, industrial accident, flash flood, tsunami, wildfire, and COVID-19. But I will pay more specific attention just in a few slides about this test case. The transdisciplinary approach that we use in our project makes the merging of science and the human factor in order to improve resilience of societies. We aim to elaborate a crisis modeling framework using different variables, human factor variables, social and societal variables, organizational aspects variables, and also paying particular attention to cascading effects. We'll also define and test some indicators regarding human factor, social and societal indicators, but we will also consider the diversity among Europe, because our test cases, as you can see, are all around Europe, but also outside Europe. And we will also pay particular attention to social groups at local scale. We will also test our procedures within citizens and communities, considering citizen individual capacity, by collecting experiences of civil society representatives and rescue agencies. The recommendation and guidelines that our project will deliver aim to develop a culture of improved preparedness, adaptability, and resilience to risk that will accommodate a variety of human and social characteristics and vulnerability. That particular aim, let me just give you some additional information to the core case studies. As I previously said, we have the L'Aquila earthquake case studies. That was an event hitting the central Italy on 6 April 2009. There was a strong earthquake destroying many buildings, but also killing over 300 people. We will also pay attention to the Manchester Arena bombing that afflicted the UK through a suicide bomber that killed 22 people and injured many other young people. We will also focus on the Venkatapuram industrial accident on May 7, 2020, causing the death of 12 people, but also requiring many people hospital treatment. And we have also the flash flood hitting the Aude region in France in October 2018. That was a heavy thunderstorm leading to flash flooding and causing the evacuation of many inhabitants of the region and killing 14 people. We will also have the wildfire case hitting the mountain of Jerusalem in August 2021 that threatened several villages and also causing many people to evacuate. And we will have also the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami that afflicted Japan on March 11, 2011, causing the death of 16,000 people and many people injured, and 3,000 people are still missing from that event. We will also have the COVID-19 case studies as a benchmark case. In our framework, benchmark case used as the COVID-19 is because of an event that afflicted all the world. So that is very important to understand how people behave during these events in different contexts, by also considering also the diversity of policies that have been applied all over the world. Then just a very focus on the main core outputs. We will deliver a safety culture measurement toolkit, describing the theoretical background and the practical tools to execute a safety culture survey and to implement a human-centeredness assessment campaign of disaster management plans and operations. We will also deliver policy recommendations that are best practices to be implemented in all pre- and post-emergency phases, but we will also have core legacy ethical recommendation, the report on the ethical principle that should be followed during, before, during, and after that an event occurs. We will also have the core app, the realization of an application for mobile phones, laptops, and tablets that will be very easy to use, and the realization will be made through the involvement of schools. This is in perfect line with also Rising Europe need to involve young generation also to be aware about scientific achievements all around the world. So this is in perfect line also with the program that Horizon Europe has developed in the last years. And then if you are curious about the core project, I kindly invite you to follow it on our official channels, the core website. We have a LinkedIn page, a YouTube also channel, and Twitter page. And if you want to be aware about our achievements and results, please subscribe to our newsletter. That the subscription is very easy. You just follow our website and find the page related to newsletter. Then to subscribe, it's very easy, just to fill in with your email, and you will be updated about our last achievements. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Raffaella, for this presentation of CORE, and really welcoming all of you to follow our activity. Then we go to our next speaker. We are really very pleased to welcome Professor Birgit Bednar-Friedl, who was one of the author of the EPCC chapter from the University of Graz. So Birgit, the floor is yours to present about climate change as a disaster risk driver, possible impact of main threats in Europe on possible adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just forgot to stop the unmute. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
That's great. Okay.
Maybe
Thank you
if
very
you
much.
put it in full mode.
It is already in full. I just did full screen. Okay. Let's go back. Let's do it again. Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes. Thanks a lot. Yes.
Thank you. So this is a great pleasure to present the results of the Working Group 2.6 assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And I have been a coordinating lead author for the regional chapter on Europe. And in my presentation today, I would like to present the key results rather quickly on impacts and risks, and in more detail on where we stand with respect to adaptation and risk management. So the first part of every IPCC report is about where do we stand now. And for Europe, we find that the warming we have seen so far, which is around 1.5 degrees Celsius on a global scale compared to pre-industrial levels, we find here that we have substantial losses and damages to different systems, to people, to ecosystems, to food systems, to infrastructure, to energy and water availability, to public health and the economy. And all these changes have been clearly attributed to climate change. So there is no doubt that warming has caused these damages on European systems. In our analysis, we identify 4 key risks for Europe, and I will speak quickly about each of them afterwards. But just as an overview, this is the so-called burning embers diagram, which you probably know from previous reports. So what you find here on this scale is the warming level, the global warming above pre-industrial levels. And the color code indicates the severity of the risk. So if it's white, we don't have any risk, or the risk is not clearly linked to climate change. If it becomes yellow, we have this clear attribution to climate change. And for all of our 4 key risks, we already have this yellow color for quite some time. The red color means that this risk is really becoming widespread. And when the red turns into the purple color, it means that also some irreversible processes are started. So that some functions really become very dangerous. For Europe, as I said, we have 4 key risks. The first is everything related to heat. So heat affecting human health, in fact, affecting ecosystems. We have losses in agricultural yields because of the combination of higher temperatures and droughts, so water scarcity. We have water scarcity as a separate key risk. Here we mean water scarcity, which is affecting different sectors, not just agriculture, but public water supply, supply to different industrial and service uses in the economies. And we have flooding along the coast from sea level rise, but also flooding of rivers. And what is a rather newer aspect is really everything related to pluvial flooding, meaning heavy rainfall. And we also have here this effect on cultural heritage, as many important cities and cultural artifacts are found on the European coasts. So just very quickly, a few numbers. If we start with heat, we can see that the projections indicate an increase in the number of people and affected by heat, not only mortality, number of deaths, but also morbidity effects. And this will increase by the factor of 2 or 3 in a warming scenario of 3 degrees compared to 1 degree. And 3 degrees, something very likely we will reach by the end of the century if we continue with the emissions we currently emit to the atmosphere. We also see that this warming will decrease the habitat space for ecosystems, both on land and in the sea. And particularly for warming of 3 degrees and warmer, we will have irreversible changes to the composition of these ecosystems. And we have also a substantial increase in areas which are threatened by wildfire. So this is really expanding from the Mediterranean area inward to the Western Central, partly also Northern Europe. For agriculture, as I said before, it is the combination of heat and drought which causes these impacts. And this is becoming particularly severe for the second half of our century. And to give you just one number, the yields of maize are projected to decrease by up to 50% when we have a warming of 3 degrees. For the remaining 2 risks, water scarcity and flooding. Water scarcity for now, we have here 2 burning embers. The left one is for Southern Europe, the right one is for Western Central Europe, so basically the remaining continental Europe. What you can see here, the risk is in Southern Europe already moderate today and increasing for higher warming levels. So a third of the population will be exposed to water scarcity during some times of the year at 2 degree warming in Southern Europe. At 3 degree global warming levels, this risk will expand to Western Central. It will affect many sectors, and it will also become a particular risk for many European cities. Flooding, both coastal and along rivers, will increase in Europe, particularly above 3 degrees. Damage costs and people affected may double compared to today. As I said before, I will today focus on adaptation, and the reason why I can do that is really that the current report has a very strong focus on solutions. And you can find in almost every sectoral chapter in our Europe chapter an assessment of the available options. And this is really Europe specific. What I show here is the assessment of effectiveness. This is the first column here, and feasibility in various dimensions. So economic feasibility, technological, other institutions fit, what are the social implications, ecological implications, is there enough land for doing this? So we really assessed this for different adaptation options which are identified to address these risks. And what you can see here is that there are a lot of large blue dots, and these large blue dots say these measures are highly effective and they are also highly feasible. Of course, there are some trade-offs to be considered, but in general, we have a lot of options available. Yet, we also have to say, if warming increases, particularly at 3-degree global warming, we will need a lot of these measures. So we cannot really cherry pick. We really need a combination of maybe even all of these measures, including transformational changes. And transformational changes are such as relocating people from coastlines to deal with rising sea levels. And one additional problem is that most of the adaptation options rely on water and land resources. So we have here potential conflicts to be resolved about what do we use our water for, what is the primary interest for using our land. Should it go towards ecosystem-based adaptation, retention areas, or do we need it for crop production? In addition to the sectoral assessment, we also did the assessment for our 4 key risks, and here I'm just showing one example. So these are again the burning amber diagrams here in the case of inland flooding, and we have also conducted an assessment of, if you like, adaptation packages. So which instruments, which measures are effective for which levels of warning, and how are they needed to be combined. And in the middle, you always have to see the situation where we are now, and if we move to the right, it's really moving forward in time. And what you can see here, for instance, in the case of flooding, we have the usual suspects, we have flood defenses, we have flood insurance, we have retention areas, we have building measures such as wet and dry proofing, but we also have options like planned relocation of settlements or no-build zones. And what you can see here are 2 things. First, some of the measures, such as flood insurance, can only do so much. So if the warming gets too strong, if the risk of flooding becomes too high, there's really no risk pooling which can resolve this problem. And the same goes also for other options, such as building measures. So you can protect your basement, you can protect your windows, you can protect your doors. But if the flooding is coming frequently, this might just not be the best decision to take. You also can see which combinations work well. So for instance, if we do something like flood defenses, combining it with flood insurance is a good idea, or here combining no-build zones with some building measures, so doing something on the governance side, and also something on the individual side of households is meaningful. The last point I would like to make, sometimes we also have these gray lines here, and these gray lines indicate that until these measures become effective and until these measures can be implemented, it takes some time. I think the example of planned relocation is here really a good example, because this is not something which you can do in the next year already. This needs to be planned strategically. You need to find solutions how you can ease this transition also for the affected population. And as I said, we have done this for 4 key risks. This is the case for water scarcity, where we also have this land use, land management options, which need this preparation time and need this time for the vegetation to grow in a way that it really protects us from water scarcity in the future. And the same for heat, where we differentiate here what needs to be done or what can be done in Northern Europe and in Southern Europe, and also for adaptation in agriculture. When we assess the policy landscape, we find that adaptation in Europe is at the forefront, also in comparison to other regions of the world. But if you take a look at the picture on the left, you can see that if we start here with the strategic planning, almost everything is blue, meaning that all countries are very well prepared. Also, a number of countries have very good risk and vulnerability assessments available, so they know which sectors, which populations are affected. The same goes for adaptation options. But if we move to the left of this policy cycle, you can see that when it comes to implementation, we are not as far as with planning, and the same goes also for monitoring the effectiveness and the stage of implementation of these different measures. So there are still many steps which need to be taken. We also see that, at least in the literature we assessed, which is mostly the academic literature, but also some good institutional reports, that we do find private sector adaptation both from households and from companies. But especially when it comes to companies, we see that extreme events or the experience of extreme events can really be a trigger or a driver of doing something. Sometimes also regulatory changes in laws or consumer pressure and incentives can have such a change in the uptake of adaptation by the private sectors. The key barriers to adaptation in Europe are, of course, everything related to how can adaptation be financed. So this is about limited financial resources. Sometimes it's about lack of engagement of the private sector and of citizens, but also political leadership. So, I mean, as I said before, making strategies is important, but following through really needs this commitment. And despite the increase in extreme events in the last years and also the release of this new report, there is still insufficient sense of urgency that something needs to be done. But I would not like to stop with this like negative notes, because we also identified a number of windows of opportunity, and this is especially relevant when it comes to climate resilient development. So these windows of opportunity either emerge in the daily practices of authorities or companies. So we have regular budget cycles, policy reforms and evaluations, infrastructure investment cycles, and all these are windows of opportunity, because very often adaptation is not an action on its own, but it really means doing the same things but differently. Let me give you an example here. If you are building a new hydropower plant, you need maybe take an additional consideration that there is an increase in extreme precipitation, in heavy rainfall, so that these additional stream flows can be accommodated. So it doesn't mean that you build a different power plant, but it means that you accommodate for this change in the climate. But at the same time, there are also some unforeseen events, like, as I said, extreme events in areas which usually have not experienced extreme events in the last decades. Also, the recovery programs due to the COVID pandemic can create an opportunity to really build up our infrastructures in a way that they can deal with more heat, more extreme rainfall, more drought. As a final note, I would like to say we do have an adaptation gap already today. This adaptation gap is projected to increase in the future if we do not increase our adaptation actions. And one of these requirements really is that we need to make sure, as I said before already, that some of these adaptation actions really have long lead time, meaning that we need to plan today so that we are prepared in 20 years. And again, two examples here. One is infrastructure. So if we are building railroad infrastructure, energy, power lines, these needs to be accommodated. The same goes for relocation of settlements and also for nature-based solutions. So if we have like natural retention areas, giving room back to rivers. These systems take time to mature and to become effective in increasing resilience towards climate change. And as a final note, what we also heard in the previous presentation, it is important. It is really important to engage with citizens and to take into account all the knowledge which is here on the local level. In Europe also we have some parts like in the European Arctic where indigenous knowledge is really important because people have a very good understanding of changes and can also be a big part in the solution. And taking care of social dimensions like gender or the sustainable development goals in general is important to not only have increased climate resilience of society as a whole, but of particularly vulnerable groups also in Europe. To conclude, I just want to highlight two sources of information. The full report was released end of February. For now, you can find the preprint version. We have already seen the preprints, so I hope the chapters will be out in nice formatting very soon, definitely before the summer. And there is also a page on fact sheets where you can find 2-page summaries on all the regions of the report. So one is there for Europe, but also on key sectors like cities, infrastructure, ecosystems. So please take a look. I hope you find this useful. Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks a lot, Professor Bernard-Friedel. I don't know if there are questions. From my side, I have one question to you, more on the European political frame, because EU has been quite active during the past year with adopting the Green Deal, the Fit for 55, and also European strategy on adaptation to climate change. Of course, we have to see how it will be implemented and what will be the progressive result. But there seems to be a massive change of attitude, at least at the level of the Commission and Member States' commitment. So how do you consider all this initiative? Is it sufficient? Is it promising? I mean, what is, or is it not enough?
I think it is extremely helpful that we have this European coordination for two reasons. Because giving this like strategic framework, which really requires that the individual member states also need to have the strategies and prepare and implement, is important. I think also what I haven't mentioned, but the spending targets of the European Commission on climate action in their programs, it was initially 20% of their budget. Now it's increased, I think, to 25%. I think this is really important to really give the topic of both adaptation and mitigation prominence. At the same time, if you really look into what is actually spent on adaptation at the European scale, but also in most of the member states, we see that most money is still going into mitigation. So, I'm not saying that we don't need the money for the green transformation. We certainly do, because only if we reduce the warming levels, we will be effective in adaptation. But I think to get a bit more balance towards adaptation would be helpful, both at the European and the member state scale. And I mean, the last point I would like to make here, I haven't included this in my presentation, but we also see that the risks which come from outside Europe, be it related to crop failures or also disruptions like the Thailand flood in 2011, these do have impacts on also on Europe. And so it's not enough to really consider adaptation as a local and national priority. It's really something where we also need need finance flows to most affected regions, to supplying regions, so that this problem is really tackled on a global scale. It cannot be only tackled on the regional and local scale.
Thanks a lot for this point. I don't know if there are any other question about this.
Yes, there is in the chat.
Okay.
One question.
Take the question. Well, I do not see.
No, because it's private. I can read it if you want.
Yeah, I do not see
yes.
the question.
So it's from Dennis Coelho. Regarding the indigenous populations in the Arctic region, they are used to change, but change is intensifying. Are there limits to the indigenous people's resilience in the European Arctic regions?
Yes, absolutely. So we have one subsection which goes into social aspects and poverty and indigenous peoples. And the problem in the Arctic really is that the speed of change is really, really large. So if we have a warming of about 1.1 degree on a global scale, it's up to almost 4 degrees in the Arctic area. And the problem is that, I mean, of course, not all people are affected, but some of these indigenous practices, such as reindeer herding, where we have this migration to different places to find the fodder for the reindeers. This really depends on that the ice cover is stable for several months over the winter. If this is no longer the case, and this has already not been the case in some years today, this really makes a tremendous change to these people and their identity and basically their livelihoods. So it's not something which is in the far future, it's something which is already happening. And we have also a few case studies. This is not like a big evidence, but a few case studies, as I said, that in general, traditional lifestyles in Europe also related to like alpine grazing. Or like small scale fisheries, they are already experience quite substantial changes, and some of them are not able to cope sufficiently or will not be able to cope for very long. So I think for the researchers among you, I think this is really a topic which needs more attention. So not just look at the country scale, at the regional scale, really look into the livelihoods of specific people in Europe and beyond.
Okay, thank you. I have also another question to you, because that is something that is really striking in our society, at least in France or in Belgium. I don't know if in other member states or in the world, but we see that how can we make our society adapting better and faster? I want just to say that we know that there are scientific publications, they are very serious warning about the risk that we are facing, the need to adapt, and the pace of these changes that is all the time increasing. And in some other aspect, we see that in the political debate or in some part of the society, it's not on the top list, not on one of the top priority, because there are also some other things that have to be managed. So how do you see the difficulty to bring our society more in action into this, and to be more proactive in adapting, because that's, I think, one of our societal challenge, to be really conscious and to make all possible efforts.
Yeah, point very well taken. I mean, we discussed this extensively, and I think one of the suggestions is to mainstream climate change really in all decision making. But at the same time, if you mainstream, this also means that the current practices are continued. So the danger of mainstreaming is that you do the same thing slightly different, and this might not be enough for higher warming. So what we actually need is really some transformational change, not just some marginal incremental change. What we do see, and this is evidence on the European but also on the global scale, is that there is a lot of action going on in cities. So there are a lot of cities initiatives where they really try out new solutions, both for adaptation but also for mitigation. And there is also quite some exchange between cities to learn from each other. So I think to really have these like initiatives in some places and to learn from them is extremely important. And to facilitate this exchange and this sharing of knowledge, I think is helpful. So why is it so important? I mean, we have this observed trend of urbanization and people moving to cities. So cities are growing anyway, and if a place is growing, there is also the chance of doing things differently. So you can build infrastructures, residential areas with green roofs, with some natural shading, some integrated parks. You can have playgrounds, which in case of flooding or extreme rainfall also serve as reservoirs for the water, so that it's not going into the buildings, but the playground is a bit deeper, so the water is collected there. So there are a lot of smart solutions, and sometimes it's easier to do it in places which are growing anyway.
Okay.
And the other thing is, I mean, we also have, we had quite some discussions about climate services. So providing information which is really relevant to a specific sector, to a specific region, communicated in time so that people can do something with this information. This kind of information needs to be increased and made available, not just for heat or flooding, which we already know, but also for other risks.
Thanks a lot, Professor, for this presentation and your participation to this webinar.
Thank you, and sorry that I have to leave, but I have to go back to teaching.
Yes, but thanks for your time and availability. Much appreciated. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I think that we go back to our program, and I would like to move to the next speaker, Dilanti Maratunga. She's head of Global Disaster Resilience Center of the University of Huddersfield, and she's a partner in CORE project. She will present us building disaster resilience needs, issue, and what does a new agenda for the science and policy community on disaster risk reduction initiatives look like. Dilanti, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can I, okay, so let me share the, give me a second, I'll try to. Can you see my screen?
Yes, but not full screen. So if you can put it on full screen. Yes, there.
Can you see it?
No, it's still not on the, it's presenter mode, not full screen.
Okay, give me a second. Yeah, is that okay?
No,
I mean,
it's still the same. So yeah, maybe Anthony, you can.
It's full screen mode, but maybe if you go back and click on the top, you had another. Maybe use slideshow at the top. If you play I mean, now if you can click on use slideshow at the top.
Okay, so I don't know.
Or Dilanti, do you want me to share the slide for you and you?
No, I changed them a little bit this morning. So slideshow.
Okay.
Is that okay? Or do you see the
the next one? We see
the thing is, we see the next one, but I think it's, I mean, we can work like this, I guess, Marie-Christine, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we will share all the presentations.
It's better.
In PDF format, so.
Afterwards, yes. You can go, Dilanti, you can go.
Right, okay. All right, okay. So is that okay? Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, okay. Give me a second. All right, okay. So thank you very much for asking me to do a presentation at this very important webinar. So I'm going to actually focus on this particular aspect of building disaster resilience, which is actually on what does the new agenda for science and policy community on DRR initiatives look like. So in that sense, I think this is actually sort of my my outline of the presentation. Very briefly, I will actually take you through the disaster trends and also what are the drivers for disaster risks at the moment. And also in that scenario, what is the role of the science and technology? And also in that sense, how does the agenda for science and policy community look like, followed by associated challenges. In terms of the disastrous outlook during the last 20 years, this is actually a very good summary in my view. It actually identifies the 10 deadliest disasters from 2000 to 2019. So as you can see, the number one has been the Indian Ocean tsunami, which took place in 2004. And also you can actually sort of see the rest, followed by earthquakes, storms, and few other earthquakes, heat waves, and so on and so forth. In terms of disaster impacts, so you can see this is actually a comparison between two 20-year periods. The first one is from 1980 to 1999, and the second one is from 2000 to 2019. So you can actually sort of see the reported disasters have more or less doubled in the second period. And also the total deaths is not that is not relating to that proportion, but it is still a little bit more. But what is very prominent here is the economic losses. So you can sort of see the economic losses have increased from $1.63 trillion US dollars to $2.97 trillion US dollars. In that sense, I suppose, in terms of counting the economic cost, you can sort of see the storms have actually created the highest proportion of economic cost, which equals to 47%, which is actually $1.39 trillion. And this is actually basically due to the fact that storms are very much associated with the US, whereas the property prices are quite high. And then the storms are followed by floods, which equals to 22%, and also earthquakes, which is actually 21%. This is actually a kind of a very rough indication of the current landscape of disaster risk. So in that sense, what are the underlying risk factors in creating these risks? So I just want to cover some key points here. The first one I want to highlight is the growing population. For example, according to the UN estimates, by 2040, the global population is expected to increase to 8.3 billion in 2030, to 8.9 billion in 2040, and 11.2 billion in 2100. So in that sense, it is the vast majority, which equals 95% of this increase, will result from population growth in less developed countries. This is actually very much an aggravator for disasters. And also the next point that I want to highlight is the urbanization. And as we all know, the 50% mark has already passed, the proportion between urban population and rural population in the world. And as you can see, the urban population will continue to increase in the coming years. And also the urbanization. This is actually a very good example to demonstrate the impact of urbanization. You can see the three images, which the first one was taken in 1975, and the second one 1990, and followed by 2010. And you can sort of see the expansion of urban growth. And this example is from Metro Manila, which is actually one of the most populous cities in the world. And also the urbanization and poverty also go in hand to hand. So there's always mismatch between economic drivers for urban expansion and also institutional mechanisms to govern. So I think it is fair to say that more densely populated and an inward concentration or intensification of disaster risk causing major asset loss and mortality amongst the urban poor. And this is actually not only a developing world problem. You can sort of see this image is actually from Lancashire, UK. So the weak governance, and you can sort of see a development site is covered with flooding. So in that sense, there's a mismatch between DRR concerns and potential economic gain when development decisions are made. So relating to that, housing built on floodplains, and also building power plants on faulty lines, for example. And then the next point that I want to highlight is the global warming. Burning fossil fuels releases heat-trapping gases to the atmosphere. And of course, the global warming has been highlighted in great length this year, particularly at the COP26 conference, which was held in the UK. So the result is the result of this entire experimentation is actually the global warming. Today, the current levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere are higher than at any time during the last 800,000 years, so which is very, very scary. And if you sort of move on to the flooding, again, I want to share the UK experiences in highlighting that this problem is actually not only a developing world problem. So it is fair to say that the UK is among the countries with the greatest risk for their economic output from flooding. So you can sort of see this was actually January 2014 flooding, and you can sort of see the average actually was more than 300 in the UK during that year. And also there are so many other risk drivers, other drivers for disaster risk, which can include technology, dependence on critical infrastructure, conflict and instability across the world. And of course, there's unfortunately, there's a kind of a conflict going on at the moment, and also the globalization. So what does this mean? So the net effect, in my view, of these drivers are very complex. But what we need to remember is that if not addressed, disaster risk will increase as a result of predetermined trends in the global environment and demography. In that sense, Sendai Framework for DRR highlights the role that the academia, the scientific and the research entities have to play in terms of focusing on disaster risk factors and scenarios, including emerging disaster risk from medium to long term, and also increasing in research for regional, national and local application. indeed, this is what we are trying to do as part of the core project also, in supporting action by local communities and authorities. We all know about Sendai framework, but I want to highlight the key facts here. It highlights the 15-year agenda, and it focuses on, very importantly, preventing new disaster risk rather than taking action when a disaster takes place. And also it emphasizes the primary responsibility of disasters actually lie with the states. And also, very important point, the scope of Sendai framework actually include slow onset and man-made and biohazards, which wasn't the case in the previous agendas. So Sendai framework actually highlights 4 priority areas. Again, it is not my intention to cover all 4, but in giving a very brief introduction to them, the first priority is actually to deal with understanding disaster risk. And the second priority is on strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. And the third one is investing in disaster risk reduction. And the final one is enhancing disaster preparedness. So our research agenda and also action and policy planning needs to be managed and governed by these 4 priorities from 2015 to 2030. In doing so, Sendai framework has identified 7 global targets. 4 are to deal with substantial reductions, and 3 are to deal with substantial increases, as you can see in this figure. So in that sense, getting to the topic of science in the heart of Sendai, of course, the role of science is formalized in the first of the Sendai framework's 4 priority areas, understanding disaster risk. That is where the major role of science plays within the first priority of this Sendai framework. And it includes unprecedented emphasis on the role of science in understanding and delivering risk reduction. And also this ambition goes beyond the capacity of just one science entity or approach, which actually thereby require a multidisciplinary agenda. So these are the texts that I have taken directly from the Sendai framework to further highlight the importance of science that is established in Sendai framework. For example, paragraph 23 states that policies and practices for disaster risk management should be based on an understanding of disaster risk in all its dimensions of vulnerability, capacity, exposure of persons and assets, hazard characteristics, and the environments. And also it emphasizes, the paragraph 25 emphasizes the need to enhance the scientific and technical work on DRR and its mobilization through the coordination of existing networks and scientific research institutions at all levels and in all regions. So these are direct quotations from the Sendai framework, highlighting the importance of science and technology. So in that sense, the priority 1 on understanding disaster risk identifies research and technology gaps and set recommendations for research priority areas in disaster risk reduction. It also talks about systematic risk, and also it promotes scientific research of disaster risk patterns, causes, and effects. And also it promotes and supports the availability and application of science and technology to decision making, and also in strengthening the evidence base, linking with disseminating risk information, including providing guidance on methodologies and standards. In that sense, what I want to do is, by taking Sendai framework and the role of science and technology in DRR and building resilience agenda, I want to highlight 11 key points as part of this agenda for research, science, and policy community on DRR initiatives. The first one that I want to highlight is the need to focus on interlinkages between DRR, sustainable development, and climate change mitigation and adaptation. This is, we call it coherence. It is really important that we look at the holistic picture rather than taking every initiative on its own. And the second agenda point I want to highlight is the use of holistic all hazard approach. It can be natural, biological, such as COVID, and also to deal with risk-based and problem-solving approach. So again, to highlight the importance of having this holistic view rather than looking into hazards on its own. And also, I want to highlight that as the third point, the need to conduct a periodic review of knowledge needs, new science and research gaps. This is extremely important in promoting new research. The fourth point that I want to highlight is in deepening our understanding to evolve risk, the root causes of disasters and their impact. We need actionable research that is useful, usable, and research. Of course, we need to carry out blue sky research. I really don't argue against that. But having said that, in terms of understanding of evolving risk, it is really good to have actionable research that is useful, usable, and used. And the fifth agenda point that I want to highlight is that the scientists and the researchers need to work with policymakers and practitioners. That is why a lot of our projects, including our core project, highlights and have the participation of communities, civil society, government actors, and so on and so forth in co-designing and co-producing research that can be used effectively. So that is the fifth agenda point that I want to highlight. And the sixth point is the need to have users included in the early stages of developing research and technology. There's no point of finding or approaching the users at the point of disseminating research knowledge, because then in a situation like that, they will not be feeling that they are owners of this process. So that is why it is really important to have the users engaged in the research process from the very early stages, so that they feel that they are part of it, so they will be able to buy in the findings, and also they will be able to actively contribute. So that is the sixth point that I want to highlight. And the seventh point is the need to have scientific advice to decision makers through close collaboration and dialogue. Again, the promoting multi-stakeholder platforms in providing scientific advice. So the next point that I want to highlight, the ninth one, is the use of expanding science and technology evidence to support capacity building and to ensure that capacity development for DRR is in fact interdisciplinary, shared across international boundaries, and is demand driven. So again, the capacity building aspect of science and technology is highlighted in this particular agenda item. And the 10th one is because of the science and technology has a strong international character, it is really important that we publish our work with peer reviewing, extensive sharing of data and results. Of course, these are very much part of our research agendas, but I just want to highlight that as a core point here. And the final one that I want to put forward is the need to support open access multi-hazard data platforms and to standardize approaches and tools to map and use of data and scenarios that make science sensible to decision makers and to the general public. So in that sense, those are kind of the new agenda roadmap. So in that sense, based around those 11 agenda points, what are the opportunities for research and science in the new disaster resilience agenda? And I want to summarize these key points under 5 key categories. The first one is actually linking research, education, and action. The second point is integrate all hazards, stakeholders, and disciplines. The third one is collaborate regionally and globally. And the fourth point is facilitate policy dialogue, knowledge sharing, and capacity development. And the fifth one is the need to develop customizable and flexible education programs. And depending on the time availability, I will try to cover them in very brief details. The first one is link research, education, and action. In that sense, it is really important that that we understand the role in creating and implementing policies that are built on the best available knowledge. This goes back to some of the key agenda points that I highlighted before. The policy informed, the science informed policy development. So in that sense, the policy research gap needs to be closed with research that can be translated to action. And also it will help us to provide and communicate actionable knowledge. So the second point that I want to highlight is actually the need to integrate all hazard stakeholders and disciplines. Again, this point was summarized in the agenda items that I highlighted. So in my view, this has three core elements. The first one is the need to have a multidisciplinary approach and also to have a multi-stakeholder approach in addressing problems from the field and thereby calibrating solutions. Again, this is what we practice in our project, having multidisciplinary teams and also having multi-stakeholder approaches and addressing the problems that we have captured from the field. So the third point is the need to collaborate regionally and globally. Again, this has been highlighted in the Sendai framework, the importance of having regional and global initiatives that promote collaboration. In that sense, the role that the international cooperation and the global partnership and citizenship plays is highly important. And in that sense, we need to actually promote the regional networks, informing global higher education networks, and also which will actually provide a coordination mechanism for science. This is very, very important as well. And the fourth category is the need to facilitate policy dialogue, knowledge sharing, and capacity development. For example, I'm actually bringing in 5 points here for the benefit of this particular aspect. The need to have greater priority putting on sharing and disseminating scientific information. And also in that process, open access has to be a priority. And also in doing so, we really need to understand the language of policymakers. And in that sense, we will be able to be an aggregator for knowledge, and also by developing a common language in understanding science by the policymakers. The fifth point that I want to emphasize is the need to develop flexible and customizable education programs. Of course, the field is expanding, but I think it is fair to say that there's a lack of young professionals. Perhaps the reason for that is actually maybe that the programs actually do not meet the employer needs, and also maybe that the sector is still a little bit immature. So in that sense, it is very, very important that we better understand market needs and links to future job markets, whatever the programs that we do. In that sense, developing flexible and customized programs is very, very important in promoting a multidisciplinary approach, which actually offer an appropriate balance of theory and field experiences. Again, a very, very important point in disaster field. It cannot be full of theory or it cannot be full of field experiences. We really need to merge and bring the two together. And also we need to draw upon the programs based on the state of the art in developing two-way knowledge transfer process between the theory and the practice. So in concluding my intervention on building resilience and the outlook of the new agenda, these are the key takeaway points that I want to highlight. For example, the natural and man-made hazards threaten millions of people every year and cause billions of property damage. Disasters continue to undermine sustainable development, so reducing its impact and identifying pathways towards disaster resilience is a global goal. And how much do we know about them? Scientists and researchers have brought a deeper understanding of the hazards, vulnerabilities, disaster risk, and their linkages to the development processes. That is what we always try to do on day-to-day basis. So in order to deepen our understanding of evolving risk, the root causes of disasters and their impact, it is really very much needed that we carry out actionable research that is useful and usable and used. In that sense, we really need to be talking with the policymakers and practitioners and having their input during the very early stages of the research process, rather than only at the dissemination stage. So in that sense, there is a need to be scientific advice to decision makers through close collaboration and dialogue, with more focused attention on interlinkages between DRR, sustainable development, and climate change adaptation. So in doing so, there need to be a holistic, all-hazard, risk-based and problem-solving approach to address the multifactorial and interdependent nature of disaster risk chain and to achieve improved disaster risk reduction. These are the key takeaway points that I want to highlight as part of a new agenda for DRR building resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dilanti, for this presentation and your takeaway. I would ask people who have questions to write them on the chat, and as announced at the beginning, we'll take a Q&A at the very end of this session. So it's time now to move to our next speaker. I'm pleased to welcome Stefano Zanut. He's a Deputy Director of the Fire Department of Coordinator, and he will present how to reduce people vulnerability against disaster. So Stefano, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Do you see my presentation?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the invitation. I am a senior officer of the Italian National Fire and Rescue Service and member of the Observatory on Safety and Rescue for People with Special Needs, and a national organism that aims to coordinate the activity on inclusive safety and rescue. In this presentation, I want to start from vulnerability as an instrument to understand, plan, and manage emergency scenarios. I will try also to talk about this, but from the point of view of a rescuer, taking in account the analysis of available data and some experiences on rescue planning in emergency scenarios. I coordinate this topic with Sofia Karma of the National Technical University of Athens, who will summarize her experience in this file considering wildfire. When I talk about disaster, we know it is determined by the combination of physical hazards and the vulnerabilities of exposed elements. The same occur also in case of little scale emergencies. UNDRR define vulnerability as the characteristic of determined by physical, social, economic, and environmental factors or processes which increase the susceptibilities of individual, community, asset, or system to the impacts of hazards. In the same sense, vulnerability is dynamic, multifaceted, and composed of various dimensions, all of which have to be considered within an holistic assessment. But in order to understand this meaning, in disaster risk reduction strategies, it is important to understand also the reciprocal relationship between people and environments. A crisis unfolds when the hazard meets a vulnerable condition. Indeed, the same hazard can lead to a different crisis, whose diverse impact depend on who in a given society is exposed to the risk, the degree of exposure, and the type of extent of vulnerability in question. Thus, is not only the triggering event that depicts vulnerabilities, It is a social construction, highly contextual, of and differ between social groups. From this point of view, people are not born vulnerable, but they are made vulnerable, and that disaster may not discriminate, but they do expose and underscore the inequalities that already exist in the communities they impact. This quote might help to carefully consider vulnerability and its consequences also on rescue management. The L'Aquila earthquake in 2009 is an example of a medium power seismic event that had a disproportionately large human impact. It caused 308 fatalities, 1,500 people was injured, 202 of them seriously, and 67,000 people were left homeless by the disasters. A brief analysis between fatalities show more young and elderly as well as women. Their deaths are partially linked to the high vulnerability of building stock in the mountain of Abruzzo. This happened also in the Great Japan earthquake in 2011. For the older population, 56% of these who lost their lives and 89 of post-disaster related deaths were aged 65 years and over. In this earthquake, also the mortality rate of persons with disability is higher in comparison with the mortality rate of all victims in affected areas. Vulnerability within our society is usually not homogeneously distributed. Social class, ethnic origin, age, gender may determine a lower or higher probability of being affected. Evidence of this is being shown in the impact of Hurricane Katrina, which caused a disproportionately high number of victims among the poor Black and elderly population in New Orleans. When we talk about emergency and rescue management, we refer to an environment condition compromised by a specific event, for example, an earthquake, flood, or fire, which people must face adopting modes that can protect them. It is in the context that rescuers operate. They have to simultaneously relate both to the affected environment and the people they must help or rescue, taking in account their specific needs. This video, for example, shows one of the several situations where firefighters operate. In this case, is a flood in Modena province in 2014 has involved many isolated houses with people who are unable to live safely. The intervention can help an elderly person with walking difficulties in wheelchair. The rescuers have to resort to an ingenious artifice to bring elderly in the amphibian. The experience acquired in rescue scenario and shared with the stakeholder in the framework of a common path has led to a possible scenario like the one illustrated in this slide. On the other side, the rescuer and the other people among whom he must to be able to identify those with specific needs. However, to be able to do it, he must obviously have gained some skills, how to recognize the special needs and the ways to meet them during an emergency, how to relate to the persons, how to manage the scenario also through local resources. Further factors can make rescue activities more challenging. For example, the personal protection equipment of the rescuers, mask, helmet, gloves, which can compromise the communication. Problems, however, should be overcome together, inclusively, involving people. In fact, we cannot forget that rescuers always arrive after the event, and in the meantime, people must be able to manage the situation alone and with the available resources, not least with the contribution of the family members or others. Furthermore, it is important that persons with specific needs of those stay near he or she make their needs clearly understood by the rescuer. And also for this reason, they must get prepared to do this. With this regard, a tool that may be useful is the rescuer card, experimented that can be used also to talk, to call 112 to ask help. It contains information about the person and about his or her specific needs. Substantially, these people should manage the scenario while waiting for arrival of the rescuers, ask for help, obviously also having suitable tools available for this purpose, interact with the rescuer to communicate their special needs and how to meet them. I want to highlight this aspect because rescue is often performed together, the rescue and the person to be rescued. And it is effectiveness may also depend on our ability to build this synergy along a cultural pathway that must accompany us in daily life. This is the theater of an emergency scenario, where you can find a part dedicated to rescue and rescuers, professional or not, and one to people. In this last, it is important to know what to do during the event and waiting help. Here play an important role safety culture and public communication. Starting from this consideration, the Italian experience in inclusive safety and rescue has moved fundamentally in these directions, planning the emergency considering real people and their specific need and involving them, raising awareness of people with specific needs and how to respond in crisis situation, organizing a rescue service considering the specific need of person, and norms dedicated to this aspect. This slide show our activities involving people with special needs. Sometimes they come to encounter the rescuers to teach how to rescue them. I want to take your attention, to have your attention to the right photo, when an operator was talking during the COVID-19 emergency with person with the Down syndrome, to stay near them, but also to talk with them and teach some to give them some information about how to manage the emergency. Also, the modern technology can link the rule of fire department, of the rule of the rescuers, and the people with specific need. In this way, we have also elaborate some guidelines for inclusive rescue for each type of disability. These guidelines are rescue management tools which take into account the special needs of the person and are being developed considering also the intervention starting from an emergency call. And finally, the concept of inclusion contained in the Italian Fire Code. The last aspect important because when we talk without norm support, it's very difficult to work only with culture. So this is an important rule of the government, who have to say that inclusion is an important aspect of the rescue, but also of the inclusive safety. And this is a definition contained in our technical fire prevention standard. And inclusion means that various disabilities, temporary or permanent, of the person who frequent activities shall be considered as an integral part of a fire safety design. I want to say as a rescue design. This is the pathway of the Italian National Fire and Rescue Service, along which people with special needs have to being involved in building an inclusive culture of safety and rescue. There is still much to do, but we start from this experience and make them available for anyone. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Stefano, for having presented how also you work concretely in the fire rescue services with people with disability. As you mentioned in your introduction, it's also a pleasure to present and to give the floor to Sofia Karma from NGOs to present the work on inclusive community engagement for reducing vulnerability upon emergency risk. So thank you, Sofia, to present your recent work in this domain.
Thank you very much, Maria Christine. My name is Sofia Karma. I'm from the National Technical University of Athens. Thanks once again for the invitation by the PEC people, and of course Stefano Zanut, for he's a colleague and friend of mine that we have cooperated also in the past. And he was kindly shared with me his time today for presenting inclusive community engagement for reducing vulnerabilities upon emerging risks, focusing on the wildfires. I'll try to be brief. So, as previously mentioned by the other speakers, climate change, or the so-called climate crisis, has accelerated and intensified disasters that are observed on a global basis, such as floods, prolonged droughts, and destructive wildfires. The most of the times we don't know when, the scale, or the level, creating a lot of uncertainties. And the disaster-prone areas are the ones that are mostly affected, like the wildland-urban interface in case of wildfires. In 2020, the world had to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, a new threat, a new challenge, especially for the more vulnerable ones in terms of effective response and preparedness. In the prospect of multi-hazard risk, the mission and work of the first responders became even more complicated and difficult As Stefano previously presented in his comprehensive presentation, the rescuer perspective, standard operational procedures seem to be needed, such as for people with disabilities in case of an earthquake or a fire amidst pandemics. At this moment, I would like to make a link with a workshop that has been conducted last March by PSCE, and of course Stefano was there to present this workshop under the Search and Rescue Project entitled Search and Rescue Operations and People with Disabilities, and it was a good occasion for sharing experiences and knowledge among practitioners and representatives from the European Disability Forum regarding emergency preparedness for people with disabilities and existing search and rescue procedures. Concerning vulnerability, it has also mentioned before that it is a critical factor for the final impact in terms of losses and injuries. Vulnerability indicators can be, among others, the proximity of population to an event, the lack of warning or of understanding to an event. So the challenge is to reach the more vulnerable ones, since every life counts and no one should be left behind. The Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, it was already presented. It is one of the inclusive and quality-based DRR strategies. It acknowledges that disaster risk reduction requires empowerment and participation that is inclusive, accessible, and non-discriminatory, paying special attention to the vulnerable ones. Inclusion of vulnerable people in the DRM seems more urgent than ever. Risk-informed and inclusive policy making is needed to ensure that no one is left behind. Community first, engagement of all groups, empowerment of children and young people for building the young capacities and promote safety culture. However, the strategies, visions, and plans need to be simple and easy to apply. Community-based early warning systems can be designed in the way to ensure that they are relevant, accessible, and understood. There is a need, of course, of locally led action. It seems that a combination of a bottom-up with a top-down DRM approach is needed in order to confront complex threats. So emergency response for all, inclusion of vulnerable people in disaster management cycle from the early stages, as already mentioned, may strengthen community resilience upon emerging risks and complex impacts. And at this moment, I would like to share with you a recent publication that we have prepared entitled Multi-Hazard Risk Approach and Inclusive Community Engagement in Disaster Risk Management, Experiences and Lessons Learned by a Recent Wildfire Event in the Greek island of Rhodes amidst COVID-19 pandemic crisis. This work has been prepared under the Council of Europe and specifically the European Centre for Forest Fires that I represent. The European Centre for Forest Fires is one of the 27th specialized centres of Europa Agreement that deals with DRR reduction. And the main goal of this work was to highlight emerging issues concerning multi-hazard risk, the importance of community engagement and resilience with inclusive criteria, and briefing the lessons learned by the evacuation of the Valley of Butterflies in the Rhodes Island during the massive wildfires in August 2021. The Valley of Butterflies is a very popular touristic destination, and we had to confront this issue. Sorry, I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes, everything is
Okay.
perfect.
Sorry.
Everything is perfect.
Sorry. So the link for the publication is available in the presentation. Here you can see some of the highlights of this work of how to build inclusive safety culture by preparing a personal emergency evacuation plan, and the personal survival kit and specific guidelines, as also Stefano mentioned. And just to make a summary of the lessons learned from this case study and the Greek experience. The management of complex emergencies and the risk triage that need to be taken by the operational people in case of multi-hazards and multi-hazard risk assessment, the importance of inclusive risk communication and early warning systems in terms of accessible broadcasting and messages, the importance of inclusive community engagement, the people-centered approach in DRM, and the role of volunteers, of course, specifically for the people that are living nearby wildland-urban interface. The motto is get prepared, get informed, get involved, build back better. In this work, there is a summary of international experience and best practices on this concerning the wildfires and exposure to smoke, protection from exposure to smoke, and inclusive emergency preparedness and response, and the importance of people's risk perception, which is really significant, especially for the more vulnerable people and young people. And finally, the significance of preparing data files of wildfire events as the one that we have prepared, since it can contribute in the upgrading of preparedness and response procedures in the future. Here you can see some of the references used for this presentation. And I would like to thank you very much for your attention and the time, and once again for the invitation of this very important project. Thank you.
Thank you, Sofia. I think that was very good to have the presentation along with Stefano, because it illustrates really the work undertaken. I would like to continue the presentation, and we'll stay with first responder and rescuer, because that's also an important side that we want to cover in this webinar. So I will be very pleased to give the floor now to Danka Schmidt from the Austrian Red Cross, and she will present us our ideas and work on how to better involve volunteers toward a complete societal resilience. So Danka, the floor is yours. So Danka, we cannot hear you. We see your presentation.
I will do one more time.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for giving me this chance to present Austrian story of involving volunteers. Okay, something happened because it's not working.
You cannot move the slide, Danka?
No, I can't move the slide.
You want me to share for you?
Moment. One more time, yes. So we all know this in a person. When the disaster happens, you have few options how you can react. So we have some concepts of you donate money, you can donate blood, you can donate in kind, and you can donate time. And these concepts are in Austria working very well, so donating money and blood. And for this one, donating kind, we need a better concept to have. Maybe you know this as well. And for donating time, we had nothing. And that's why we came with the idea to create such a tool like Team Österreich. And you know it very well that this seems to be like a disaster dilemma, because people, when disaster happens, they want to help immediately in a person right now. And because they can't stand watching the needs shown in media, because media, the role is very important. Like 50 years ago, we were reading facts about disaster. Now they are showing us emotional stories. And it's also disaster dilemma for organizations like Red Cross, because response organizations, we cannot handle influx of potential helpers due to lack of structure, preparedness, or standard operation procedures. So in other words, people are more and more willing to help, but they are less interested in lifelong engagement, like with Red Cross. So there is this trend we see, or we saw, that this is more for people, they want to project orientate themselves. They are interested in short-term or short notice volunteering. And for us, this is this micro or online volunteering. And what we needed, so we needed to recruit and mobilize people before, what's very important, before disaster and during disasters. We needed that we are able, that they register and we contact them, these potential helpers, very quickly. And we needed to find instruments for spontaneous recruitment and involvement. So what we did in 2007, together with Radio 3, this is the biggest Austrian radio station in Austria, we launched a campaign called Team Österreich. And we asked citizens to register in the web-based database about their qualification and how they will help. And I want you to listen to the sound of Team Österreich in radio.
Hallo, Maria Rautner hier aus Leoben. Auch ich bin im Team Österreich. Da ist alles organisiert und man weiß genau, dass die Hilfe auch was bringt. Und deswegen mache ich da mit.
Hallo, ich bin der Stefan Sulzemer, bin 21, komme aus Beistor, das ist in Oberösterreich, und ich bin jetzt ein Team Österreich. Wenn irgendwas ist, kann ich schaufeln, mit der Scheibe drauf fahren und alles Mögliche.
Hallo, ich bin die Anna Sarah aus Delfs, bin 20 Jahre alt. Ich bin jetzt auch im Team Österreich, weil ich nicht durch meine Finanzen etwas erreichen will, sondern einfach durch meine Zeit und durch mein Können.
Hitradio Ö3 und das Rote Kreuz suchen Menschen, die anpacken, wenn Österreich Hilfe braucht. Jetzt anmelden auf oe3.orf.at/Team Österreich.
It's the first time I played it. I wanted you to get a feeling how this is when it's running on radio, and we are seeking for persons. And what's our menu? That this is from between 2007 and now today 22. So this is already 15 years that we created this Team Österreich. First was this classic one. This is for disaster relief, for, you know, hands-on, that we need your help. And what could be this typical task, like simple manual activities like sorting, packing of relief goods, shovel snow, or filling sandbags, yeah, or distribute relief goods, and so on. Then we have second one, food aid, again, hands-on. And then we were thinking of it's time to get digital. And this is this help online, small efforts, but great impact. And the last one is this immediate response to out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. So what were the new possibilities? So when Team Österreich goes smartphone, what it means, you are always available. Location-based alerting was possible. And you are more flexible, we are more flexible than just text messaging you. New topics were covered, like online and micro-volunteering, like crowd tasking, warning and alerts, and be prepared for crisis. Onboarding, what it means we are up to date to customer relationship management. We can remind to send very useful updates. If you forgot to tick or click what are your skills, what languages you speak. So we ask again, do you speak German? Do you speak English? Or reaction to alerts are more flexible. We are out of yes, no scheme and usable for all devices like mobiles, web, and so on. What's very important, you can get your warnings and alerts. This is this additional benefit for users. And app stays updated with you and uses this Austrian meteorological office warnings like for storm and rain and snow and ice and thunderstorm and so on. Then you can also get civil protection alerts from the governments. We created a new possibility for digital missions. And these are missions to be done on the spot with the smartphone or skill-based selection of Team Österreich members or location-based selection of them. And this is free to define areas. And this is this immediate response to Red Cross. And types of missions could be giving this feedback or situation reports. You could send photos or this multiply choice, text, measurements, and task and practical aid that we disseminate important information and how you can help neighbors and how you can help to protect you from further damage. Be prepared. This is very new function that was very, very important for us to have because you can prepare yourself and your family and your household for disasters. It's true to life and it's based on your actual situation. It's very modern and many functions can be used to get prepared for a disaster. And we're not patronizing, so you are getting many tips, many hints and advices. And at least we want you to be informed. We want that you get to know about recent missions. We want you to get news about Team Österreich. So if I tell you a few facts, we have now 92 members, 92,000 members, and the number is still growing. Out of them, 90% are willing to do manual work. 52% of them are female members. And urban areas are stronger than rural areas. And alert response rate is by us between 30 and 70%. So Team Österreich is a matter of fact in the Austrian disaster response. And to tell you a few numbers more, that if we had big floods in 2013, we had more than 3,000 Team Österreich members. They were deployed for tasks like cleanup efforts. Between 2015 and 16, during population movement, refugee crisis, we had daily 200 Team Österreich members daily doing their tasks. And pandemic response, for example, we used for neighborhood help because they were doing the shopping for those in quarantine, for example, or for our members, for our Red Cross members as well. And if I come for today and you see there in the app, there is this Team Österreich Ukrainian, be the body. So what we are asking now, our members, you remember there was this question, do you speak English? Nowadays we need, говорите по-русски, говорите по-украински. Do you speak Russian? Do you speak Ukrainian? Why? Because we need you. Be our body. Be the body for the persons in a need. Because are you willing to support people who have had to flee their homeland in their everyday lives here in Austria? Please come and help. So you can always register for the task you choose, you want to help, and we support you with this. And that's what we needed in Austria, what we created, and since 2007, I think it's kind of success story we can see here, that when we need you in a time of disasters, we can contact you. Thank you for your attention. I was in a hurry because I saw that 12 o'clock is approaching, so I hope you got
No, thank you. Thank you, Danka, for this very good example on how to adapt to the evolution of the society and to the availability of the people. And as you said, maybe some are more ready to help for small tasks or very specific tasks than long lasting engagement with the Red Cross. So that increase considerably, I think, the resilience of society to have these additional helps and helpers. So thank you for this presentation. I think it's a very relevant example on how to change the relation with the volunteers and to adapt. Thanks for that. Maybe I see in the chat that there is a question. Maybe Rafaela, you would like to address it. It's a question to CORE, to the project. So
I read the question that was made by Karsten. Thank you for it. Yes, we address also the multi-hazard and multi-risk approach. This specific activity will be addressed in the coming months, in the sense that is an activity that just started in February, and it's related to the work package 4. And your question is about the hazards that need to be considered about also by considering the most relevant for user. And yes, the perspective that we will use in our approach will also take into account this. The work package that I mentioned, the work package 4, also collected input from the 2 others and from the case studies. And the perspective of user will be for sure taken into account for our approach. And yes, we will also prioritize hazards, also by considering the importance of increasing people resilience. And this is, as I have said, an activity that is under construction, and but it will for sure take into account these considerations. Thank you very much for the question. I hope to have answered your question properly.
Thank you, Rafaela, for this answer. I will check if I see some. Yeah, I think that also Karsten commented. There is one question to Danka about Team Österreich. So Team Österreich is a very interesting concept. Does it also involve training of the participant or of the member? And to what extent does the app relate to legacy system?
Yes, thank you for this question. Of course, it's involving training. So at the beginning, it was much easier because we were creating this for before the disaster. So every member that registered got then 6-hour training, how to behave then, how usually such a mission looks like. And this, you need to know that you will be then recognized wearing your vest, because this vest is also protecting you, and this is showing the other responders that who you are. And you will get to know on the spot who's your leader, who's your team leader, who's the supervisor, and so on. And you are always getting this. You have briefing at the beginning, and you have then debriefing. So, and this is everything involved in this training that you will have with your Red Cross branch. So if you comes from Vienna, this is in Viennese Red Cross will be done. And if it's in Graz, for example, then with your branch. So this is usually the step we have to do. And the second the question, I am not sure I can answer, because I'm not sure what.
Well, Mary, maybe I can clarify on what I was
Yes.
trying to go for, because
Okay.
usually you have some national app, and I think the same is true for Austria, where like sort of public information is being deployed to the people, and you know, if you run an additional app, you may be in conflict with these, or you know, that's just the idea. It's like to what extent are you actually relating to the systems which are in place? To go coherent with those messages and standard operation procedures, as you said. And then there's another question out of interest that I would like to put in, is if you could maybe share with us who are typical members, like in terms of age and gender and so forth. Is there something you can say, or is it just very diverse?
Yes, it's definitely something I can say, because we began with really youngsters, let's say, because maybe they can't donate money, but they can donate their time. So this was this first message, and the first responses, and in this spot you heard these were young people. But this changed in refugee crisis, as really we had then at once between 40 and 50 years old. People were more involved, and there we had 200 per day. Like now in this Ukrainian crisis, they are also helping them. Today, this is between 50 and 100 per day. So this is Austria-wide in 9 provinces. So 100 Team Österreich members are helping every day. In our, you know, you have this housing, and they or deliver food or serve the food or prepare the beds, change the beds, and everything what they are asked for. So, and it's very important we know your skills, because when you speak Ukrainian and Russian, you are also interpreter, not just for them, you are also helping us. So for example, we were transferring the kids that they how to say, they were brought to Austria as cancer patients. And this Team Österreich interpreter were going with them, as they support. This young lady supported also our ambulance cars with the translations. So it's different, because in floods you have, maybe this is this manpower, so we need young or men as they are filling sandbags. But this really differs from every disaster or situation or accident or incident. It doesn't need to be disaster. Maybe this is small disaster for someone only. So, yeah.
Thanks a lot, Danka, for this explanation. I think that if I do not see any more questions, we come to an end to this webinar. So I would like to thank you all the presenters, and thank you all the participants. We will circulate the presentation to the one who are registered and participated to the meeting. I'm just taking one last opportunity to mention that PSC is organizing an upcoming conference in Austria in collaboration with the local Austrian Red Cross from Salzburg. And we will have a topic which will present how to face the next pandemic, how to be prepared for the next pandemic, among other things, but I think that resonates with our discussion today. So if you have interest, do not hesitate to check our website. So thanks a lot for your participation, for your time. I hope that you learn a lot of interesting things, and keep to follow core project because we are at the very beginning of the project, so we'll develop more and more outputs, and we'll be very pleased to share that with you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.